Hi, my name is Jim Vigmond, and I have the very great privilege to act as chair of the inaugural Summit on the Provision of Attendant Care Services. Our focus today is on enhancing inclusion. There are over 350 of you online and present in person for this program, coast to coast. It's an absolutely remarkable feat, and I commend all of you for your interest. I would like to welcome our speakers, about who I will introduce in a few minutes. The purpose of this summit is to promote our vision for Ontario, where timely access to attendant services supports all of Ontario's citizens and indeed across the country. All citizens with disabilities deserve the same chance with the same support to pursue their goals of leading satisfying, productive, and inclusive lives. All of us. No exclusions. The summit represents the vision of a person many or most of you already know, Bill Adair. The vision grew out of the partnership of Spinal Cord Injury Ontario and the Personal Injury Alliance, an alliance of 3 law firms, McLeish Orlando, Thompson Rogers, and Onley Vigmond, of which I'm a partner. And it's to develop policies to create opportunities for all citizens of Ontario, including, of course, the mobility challenged. We have assembled a very august group on our panel today, one which we think has a number of different and important perspectives to the issues involved in the provision of attendant services. I would like to acknowledge specifically the contributions of Ontario Spinal Cord Injury Solutions Alliance, of the Ontario Neurotrauma Foundation, and Spinal Cord Injury Ontario for their ongoing assistance in promoting the rights and interests of those suffering mobility impairment. After we conclude some preliminary matters and introductions, we will have our dialogue about attendant services. We encourage you to participate in the discussion. We want this to be as interactive as possible. We have 2 of our panelists spending a few minutes each outlining a platform. Other than that, we have reserved all of our time for you to ask questions of our panel. For those that are online, please send an email using the Ask a Question software on the computer program, which should appear on the bottom of your screen. The questions will come in to me, and I will do my best to sort through them and to direct them appropriately. If you wish a question to be directed to a particular panelist, please so indicate. For those of you in attendance, please use the question cards provided on your chair and raise your hand if you can, or have an attendant do so, and someone will be by to pick up the cards. At this time, I would like to introduce Marianne McCall. Marianne is on the board of directors of Spinal Cord Injury Ontario and is its chair of the Advocacy Committee. She is the academic lead for the Canadian Disability Policy Alliance. She is associate director at the Centre for Health Services and Policy Research. She is a professor at Queen's University and has come from Kingston today. And I call upon you now, Marianne.
Thank you, Jim, and good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Board of Directors of Spinal Cord Injury Ontario and the Canadian Disability Policy Alliance, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the first Spinal Cord Injury Ontario Public Policy Summit. Thank you for attending, either in person or electronically. We're pleased to have with us this morning representatives from the Premier's Office, from the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care, from the Ministry of Finance, provincial members of Parliament, representative from the local health integration networks, service providers and agency personnel, and consumers who use attendant services and members of their support system. It is my pleasure now to invite you to welcome the Lieutenant Governor of Ontario. Ladies and gentlemen, Mesdames et Messieurs, As is customary at this time, and for those who can, please rise and join me in welcoming the Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, the Honourable David C. Onley, accompanied by CEO of Spinal Cord Injury Ontario, Mr. Bill Adair. It is my pleasure this morning to introduce the Honourable David C. Onley. The Honourable David C. Onley was appointed Ontario's 28th Lieutenant Governor following a distinguished career as a broadcaster. His Honour has championed disability issues for many years. He served as Chair of the Government of Ontario's Accessibility Standards Advisory Council and was an Accessibility Council member for the Rogers Centre and the Air Canada Centre. As the first Ontario Lieutenant Governor with a physical disability, His Honour has adopted accessibility as the overarching theme of his mandate. He has defined accessibility as that which enables people to achieve their full potential. He believes that true accessibility occurs when disabled people can fully participate in the social, cultural, and economic life of Ontario. Because accessibility includes equal access to opportunities like education, His Honour is expanding the Aboriginal youth literacy programs to include computer literacy initiatives. His Honour was born in Midland, Ontario, grew up in Scarborough, and was inducted into the Canadian Disability Hall of Fame and the Scarborough Walk of Fame. The Lieutenant Governor of Ontario is the Colonel of the Regiment Queen's York Rangers and also Honorary Colonel of the 25th Field Ambulance. He is the recipient of the Rick Hansen Award of Excellence, the Courage to Come Back Award, and holds 11 honorary degrees. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me and welcome the Honourable David C. Onley, Lieutenant Governor of Ontario.
Thank you very much, Marianne, and good morning, everyone, and a special greetings to everyone online. It's a pleasure to be here today and see many familiar faces, both up here on the dais and in the audience, and an opportunity to speak on a topic that I have obviously a great deal of interest in. Anything in particular to do with accessibility and the whole field is of interest to me for obvious reasons, because I am, as was read in the introduction, the first Lieutenant Governor with a physical disability. And so it came as no surprise to people that when I was appointed that I would adopt accessibility as the overarching theme of my term of office. But one of the things I wrestled with at the very beginning, before even taking office, was how I was even going to define accessibility. And I like to repeat it because it's something that I worked on very carefully. And defining accessibility is that which enables people to achieve their full potential. And the reason I wanted that definition and wanted to use that definition throughout my term is that I wanted people to understand that accessibility was significantly more than ramps, curb cuts, wheelchair parking spots, all the very, very important things that have improved physical accessibility in our culture over the last 25 plus years, things that were fought for very diligently and by, quite frankly, a number of the people on this panel up on the dais here, battle by battle, battles against City Hall, battles against the TTC, battles to raise awareness. All of those things were very important, and they had to happen first, and they have happened, but accessibility is much more than that. It has to do with attitude as well, attitude towards other people. I coined the definition because I want people to understand a truly accessible society is one where people at every level of ability, whatever that might be, are valued for what they can do rather than being judged by what they allegedly or by perception can't do. In truth, it is a matter of achieving a level of independence that actually transcends the level of disability, whatever it may be. Of course, as it pertains here today, in terms of assisted living, we have to think back to a whole range of independence movements that have already occurred. Historically, of course, independence has meant different things, but it has been a matter of citizens demanding freedom from either tyrannical rulers or colonialism, or as we have seen even in recent months in the last few years in various parts of the world, upsurges of popular will by people. And independent movements, however they were characterized, have been a part of our history. You only have to go back to the United States, to France. I mean, we can go through the history books to learn these things. But there's been another kind of independence movement that has been going on since the 1970s, beginning in the United States, spreading to Canada in the 1980s, and that is the concept of independent living, which is another kind of independence. It arose from a yearning by people with disabilities and their families for them to be able to live independently within their communities. And it was driven not only by the desire to tackle the everyday issues of living with disability, but also by the wider social and political issues posed by those issues. Before the independent living movement came about, physical disability often meant long-term confinement, either to a nursing home or chronic care hospital. Now, in my particular instance, I had polio at the age of 3.5, thereabouts, and was quite dramatically affected by it, as a matter of fact. I acquired this well before the concept of independent living took flight, and spent almost 8 months in hospital, first at Sick Kids in Toronto and then at Thistletown. Some of the older people in this room might remember that name, which was the Sick Kids Convalescence Home near Woodbridge. Although there was, by the way, some of you may have seen the Toronto Star article about this, the ebook, as a matter of fact, this past summer called That Polio Season, and I was one of the people featured in this 8,000-word mini ebook. And in the process, the reporter dug into all sorts of files at Sick Kids and pulled out all sorts of doctors' reports and comments about me, and some of them I suppose might have been a little bit foreshadowing as to what I might end up doing. It said I was, sometimes I was obstinate, I was very strong-willed, I posed a bit of a discipline problem at times. I'm sure my mother and father wondered and hoped they really didn't spend too much time or money to figure that out, but they also said in it that this child, quote unquote, is going to be a long-term case. That's what the characterization was back then in '53 and into '54. But I was eventually released into the care of my parents, and with some amazing physiotherapists, pediatricians, and a series of very painful surgeries, I gained the skills and the physical ability and the education to lead a very independent life. So that was my circumstance, but along the way, I still needed assistance on various occasions. For other people, the road has been much more difficult than mine. But today, thanks to the efforts of organizations like Independent Living Canada and the availability of attendant outreach services, people with physical disabilities can live independently within their communities. And the result is a society in which such accommodations as the ones I mentioned earlier, the curb cuts, the automated doors and assistive devices, they're pretty much taken for granted. It's a society in which children with disabilities attend the same schools as those without disabilities, which was my circumstance in the 50s and the 60s, and I didn't realize it was a big deal. And I didn't realize back then that it was something that my parents fought for before the different boards of education. A society in which accessibility standards for public spaces and facilities are legislated. These should be things that we almost take for granted. But all in all, I would say, and I think it's fair to say, that life for people with disabilities has improved enormously compared with the way society treated them in the past. There's always a however. However, for all the physical barriers to independent living that have fallen, there still remains significant psychological barriers. It's a key one, and it can be found in one word, and that is attitude. The negative attitude of too many people towards disability and those who live with it. I often point out in my speeches that people with disabilities are the largest single minority group in our culture, our society. Over 15% of the population right now have a disability. It would, by recent projections that I read, seem that it will be up to 20%, 1/5 of the entire population, not much beyond the year 2020. Half of the people with disabilities have so-called invisible disabilities, and half have physical disabilities, such as mine. And yet, this group, the group that I'm in, the group that many of the people in this room are in, this significant minority group, is the only minority group in our society that any other group can join. If you happen to be Aboriginal and a healthy person, a visit to the doctor, and you suddenly have joined the disability minority, the largest minority. And that can apply to any other minority or any other group in our society. It's significant to understand that because it can come as a result of aging, it can come as a result of a visit to the doctor, it can come as a result of a simple accident that could occur at any given time. So in all of this, attitude is very, very important. I often quote an aspect of attitude in relation to a man named Roger Crawford. If you've not heard of him, you can Google his name after my presentation later on, and maybe even add in the word tennis to narrow it down somewhat. But Roger Crawford was a gentleman who was born with both arms half the length of average and had only 2 fingers on each hand. Yet, notwithstanding that physical limitation, he went on to become, in the United States, a national collegiate tennis star. He also became the very first person with a physical disability to become a certified coach with the United States Tennis Association. He's retired now and is a motivational speaker, and online you can find many of his speeches. One of my favorite quotes related to him has to do with overcoming disability. And what he has said is this, is that when people ask him how he has overcome his disability, he says, I tell them, I haven't overcome anything at all. I've simply learned what I cannot do. Given the fact that he has only 2 fingers in each hand, he says, such as, I can't play the piano or eat Chinese food with chopsticks. But more importantly, he said, I've learned what I can do. And then I do what I can with all my heart and all my soul. Well, that's the kind of person I would like to have on my team or working on my staff. I often ask people, and I've asked this long before I became Lieutenant Governor, when I was a reporter with City TV and doing presentations and speeches to different groups. When you meet someone with a physical disability, especially if they're using an assistive device, when you meet them for the first time, what do you see? Do you see the disability or do you see the ability of the person within? We all like to say that we see the ability. And we like to say that because it's a nice answer, it's a warm answer, it makes us feel good, and we all know it's absolute nonsense. It's not true. We all see the assistive device first. We all see the disability first. And I like to remind people that there's nothing wrong with that, so long as we don't let that first impression become the basis of a value judgment that we form on the worth or the potential of that person. And yet today, that is the conundrum facing virtually all people with disabilities. If people could learn to look beyond disability to a full concept of ability, I have no doubt that we would finally achieve a truly accessible society. I'd also like to refer to an example, if you will, of impressions of people. Assume that your job has been redefined this afternoon and your employer simply says to you, you have to conduct for your branch or your office an interview this afternoon with 4 people or more, but there's a restriction on the interview process. The restriction is you can't ask their name, and you cannot see them from the waist up. You can only see them from the waist down. You can't know, you don't know who they are. And by the way, if you screw up the interview process, you lose your job. So the stakes are high. Now, if you rejected hiring the person with one leg only because that person had one leg and no other reason, you would have missed hiring Terry Fox. If you did not hire the person in the wheelchair only because he was in a wheelchair, you would have missed hiring Rick Hansen. If you didn't hire the woman in the racing wheelchair who was perfectly bilingual, you would have missed hiring Canada's greatest Paralympic athlete, Chantal Petitclerc. And if you did not hire the man in the power wheelchair who also required a computer to speak on his behalf, and you didn't hire that person only because of those two limitations, then you would have missed hiring the person considered today to be the smartest person alive on the planet Earth, Dr. Stephen Hawking. Now then you could go back to your boss, and in some vain attempt, you could try to explain why you'd rejected hiring Terry Fox, Rick Hansen, Chantal Petitclerc, and Dr. Stephen Hawking. And then you could collect your pink slip. Now, this is a mythical scenario, but only in the sense of the use of the names, because I can assure you that every single day in the province of Ontario and right across Canada, the same scenario gets enacted again and again and again. Let's take a look at the unemployment numbers and why the support of independent living is so utterly crucial. At the height of the Great Depression, the worst level of unemployment in Canada, the greatest economic catastrophe in the history of this country, unemployment in Canada reached 24%. And it scarred the psyche of an entire generation, those of our parents and our grandparents. And yet today, in this country, the unemployment rate for people with disabilities has remained consistently around 25%, greater than the Great Depression, which means that for people with disabilities, it is not a Great Depression, it is a perpetual depression. What's worse is that that 25% doesn't even include people who have accepted part-time jobs or are dramatically underemployed. And when you look at the raw numbers presented by the federal panel on rethinking disability, the group that was commissioned by the finance minister, Jim Flaherty, over a year ago, to interview corporations that do hire people with disabilities, the statistics and the numbers are staggering. That in Canada today, 795,000 adults who are able to work, want to work, and are trained to work are in fact living on government assistance. And of that 795,000, 340,000 of them are recent college or university graduates. Again, able to work, wanting to work, but living on government assistance. There's a disconnect here. Government assistance in this instance means a state of poverty and no opportunity to work. And it leads us to one of the great myths that's in our society today, the myth of the labor shortage. There is no labor shortage. There is a shortage in some areas. I will admit there are some slots. But overall, there is no myth. There is no labor shortage. There's 795,000 people who want to work. There's 340,000 of them being recent college graduates who want to work and are trained to work and are capable of working. But instead, you and I, as taxpayers, and we reached a conclusion about this long ago in a social contract that was developed over decades, that quite frankly, we wouldn't let people starve to death on the streets. We would provide for people. We would provide just a bare minimum, though. And so those people who receive the government assistance are living in a state of poverty. What we need to do, and we have to do as a culture, as a society, is move to the point where we are transferring these people from being those on completely government assistance to a new status, the status of taxpayer. And I just simply suggest to you that until both government and the private sector address this issue head on and look at the different agencies and boards and groups that are out there, whether it's jobinfo.ca or linkup.ca or the multiple other organizations that assist people with disabilities trying to find jobs, until government and business links up with them and decides to start hiring as a matter of choice people with disabilities, until that happens, I would suggest to you that economic prosperity is not possible. I think you could prove it mathematically that it's not possible. Sooner or later, some jurisdiction is going to figure it out. Sooner or later, some jurisdiction is going to decide that we're going to change the situation, the basic calculus, if you will, that we're going to get people off welfare, that we're going to get them into an employment situation, and perhaps government has to lead the way in this regard. I don't know. But it is something that has to happen. I'm pushing past the edge of being apolitical because I only have about a month or two left in my term. So what are they going to do? Tell me to leave early? I don't know. But in all seriousness, this all relates back to what we are talking about today, and that is in terms of special care for people with disabilities at home. The fact is that most people with disabilities can and do function just as well as anyone else if they're given the opportunity to achieve their full potential. What they need is the kind of support that enables them to be part of their communities. And this, by the way, should not be thought of as some sort of special need or special exception. As a matter of fact, it is a human right. It is part of the United Nations Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. That's specifically Article 19. It calls upon parties in the convention to ensure, and I'll quote, that persons with disabilities have access to a range of in-home, residential, and other community support services, including personal assistance necessary to support living and the inclusion in the community and to prevent isolation or segregation from the community, close quote. In 2010, Canada ratified the convention that codifies the rallying cry of people with disabilities everywhere: nothing about us without us. We Canadians pride ourselves, and with some considerable justification, on living in an open, pluralistic society where people of all races, cultures, and creeds live together in a truly remarkable degree of harmony. One of the consistent responsibilities as being Lieutenant Governor is to receive foreign dignitaries, consul generals, and ambassadors. And over the 6.5 years that I've been Lieutenant Governor, I've received dozens and dozens, if not now hundreds, of foreign dignitaries. In virtually every single instance, the key topic that they want to talk about is how we live in Canada in such a remarkable degree of harmony. It truly is remarkable. People with disabilities can and should be able to make decisions about their level and type of care. Attendant services promote an enhanced sense of control and independence. They enable people to live with dignity in their chosen community and to participate in all aspects of society. Without attendant services, people with spinal cord injuries and other physical disabilities end up being marginalized with little or no hope of achieving their full potential. And that's why attendant services, which encourage independence and promote active living, are so important. So I applaud Spinal Cord Injury Ontario and the Personal Injury Alliance for convening today's Public Policy Summit. Whether you are a consumer, are a policymaker with an interest in community health care, or you work in the health field, I hope you will make the most of this opportunity today to learn more about attendant services in Ontario. And as the representative of Her Majesty the Queen, and on behalf of the people of Ontario, I bring you greetings and thank you for inviting me, and hope you enjoy the rest of today's webinar. Thank you.
Lieutenant Governor Onley, you're a great ambassador, and excuse me for having my back to you, sir. It's the nature of the setup here. You're a great ambassador and promoter for the mobility impaired and the right to independent living for all citizens and helping people reach their full potential. You inspire those around you, both consumers and those of us who champion their cause. I had the pleasure of meeting Terry Fox at 5 in the morning one day. He was by himself with his truck behind him, and he was hopping along, and I don't know if anyone else had that experience. It's one of the most cherished moments of my life. It struck a chord with me like none other. And here was somebody who, with his mobility impairment, was not letting it get him down and was reaching his own potential, and he was, in fact, a great ambassador, and he, as you, sir, was a great ambassador. We thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to address us on this most important topic. Ladies and gentlemen, mesdames et messieurs, at this time, please rise for those who can for the departure of the Lieutenant Governor of Ontario. That was a very inspiring presentation. I'm advised that the Ask a Question field actually appears on the right side of the screen and not at the bottom. Thanks, Nikayla. Now I'm going to spend just a few minutes introducing our panel, and then we're going to get into a couple of presentations and then the questions, and I've been getting questions from you fast and furious. Keep them coming. To my immediate right is Nick Gurovich. Nick is the founding member and outgoing president of the Ontario Rehab Alliance, a professional association which represents rehabilitation practices across Ontario with over 4,500 healthcare providers. He's also the co-founder and executive director of Functionability Rehabilitation Services, being a community-based rehabilitation practice. He just got back from Australia, and unfortunately, he missed the thrashing of the Habs by the Toronto Maple Leafs. Nick, like me, is an avid Habs fan. To Nick's right is Peter Athanasopoulos. Peter will be known to many of you. He's been wheeling through the halls of Lyndhurst since 1991 when he first joined what was then Canadian Paraplegic Association Ontario as Peer Support Program Coordinator. Over the 13 years since, Peter has worn many important hats and now spearheads advocacy efforts for the mobility impaired, dealing with governments and politicians, and Peter has been most instrumental in organizing this summit. Next is Cheryl Cordner. Cheryl is the resource coordinator with Spinal Cord Injury Ontario Attendant Services Program. In this role, Cheryl is an active member of the Attendant Outreach Group in Toronto, working in collaboration with the Project Information Centre, completing assessments with applicants for attendant services, and brings a wealth of experience and expertise to today's program. To her right is Barbara Hall. Barbara has more than 40 years of experience working as a community worker, lawyer, and municipal politician. She has served 3 terms as a Toronto City Councillor and was Toronto's mayor from 1994 to 1997, where she represented the city with dignity, grace, and class. She is currently Chief Commissioner to the Ontario Human Rights Commission since 2005, and brings a very unique perspective to a discussion of the right to attendant services. Next is Sandra Carpenter. Sandra is currently the Executive Director of the Centre for Independent Living in Toronto and board member of Spinal Cord Injury Ontario. During her time, in addition to helping establish the Centre for Independent Living in Toronto, she created the first ever radio and then television show that featured disability issues and stories The television show evolved into a program called Moving On, aired on both CBC Television and TV Ontario. The Centre for Independent Living in Toronto is a consumer-controlled, community-based resource organization. To her right is Dr. Keith Hayes. Dr. Hayes is Professor Emeritus in the Department of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation at the University of Western Ontario in London. He also serves as Chair of the Ontario Neurotrauma Foundation and Spinal Cord Injury Quality of Life Committee, and has been recognized as one of the leading international authorities on the needs of individuals with spinal cord injury. He has served as consultant to Ontario, other provincial, U.S. and Australian governments on research issues relevant to this topic, and he's also a senior partner in the firm Future Care Cost Associates, and for over 30 years has served as an expert witness in the Superior Courts of Justice. Next to Dr. Hayes is Anita Kaiser. Anita is completed her Master of Science degree in Rehabilitation Science through the University of Toronto with a focus on parenting with a spinal cord injury, a most unique and relevant topic for today. For the past 12 years, Anita has been a peer support volunteer with the Spinal Cord Injury Ontario and an injury survivor presenter with Parachutes No Regrets program, formerly known as Smart Risk. Anita is a board member of the Canadian Spinal Research Organization and Canadian International Scientific Exchange Program. She is now the proud mother of an energetic 5-year-old daughter. And I actually met her a couple of years ago and can attest to the fact that she is indeed energetic. To Anita's right is Bonnie Smith. Bonnie has 2 weeks left to have completed 25 years of service as a social worker at Lyndhurst Hospital, Toronto Rehab Institute, University Health Network. She is endeared and well-known and is an expert in the field of the provision of services in the community once those have been discharged from Lyndhurst. She graduated from McGill University with a Bachelor of Arts degree and from the University of Toronto with a Master of Social Work degree, and now works with patients who have spinal cord injuries or related conditions. And finally, to her right is Sadina Sadikot, a consumer representative. She's the proud mother of 2 children who has a progressive muscular disorder. While she values the support offered by outreach agencies and the local Canadian Community Care Access Centre, the lack of 24-hour service for a ventilator user like Sakina means that she has to rely on her family. Before she was admitted to the self-administered direct funding program, her family had little means of respite from day-to-day care. Sakina stresses that while 24-hour community-based care may be expensive, it is far cheaper and better for her and her family than long-term care. That is our panel. I'd like to start with asking Peter if he could present to us his thoughts on the current environment in the public sector provision of attendant services.
Thank you, everyone. Hello. Independent living service providers have been an underfunded sector across Ontario for quite some time. Who are independent living attendant service providers? Well, there's self-administered direct funding attendant services, there's outreach attendant services programs, and supportive housing assisted living services, all of which follow the independent living philosophy. Due to lack of resources, thousands of people are on wait lists for services in Ontario, and many more are experiencing limited services and inappropriate service settings to compensate. We cannot afford to under-resource this sector. It is way too costly when we do so, and here are a few examples. Are you aware that many people who use ventilators would not be able to live independently in their homes without appropriate attendant services? When attendant services is not available, these individuals are living in critical care units for years, or long-term care facilities, or continuing complex care. No person should be forced to live in these institutional settings due to limited community options. Hospital beds are far more costly than attendant services. Also, when hours of service are limited per person, service hours are shared with community care access centers, which is a different type of service. For example, nurses are only allowed to provide bowel or bladder management routines, not PSW attendants through CCAC. Nursing wages are significantly higher than PSW attendant wages. Also, when people are in inpatient rehabilitation settings, often alternate levels of care is created because people are not able to be discharged with appropriate services. Again, very costly to the system. I'm also aware of a few people that visit emergency departments on a daily basis because there is not enough attendant service hours available. These people prefer to visit Emerge than live an institution away from their families. Again, this is an inappropriate use of our tax-paying dollars, particularly in these economic times. Cost to the system is one thing, but what about quality of life? Did you know that a recent study funded by the Ontario Neurotrauma Foundation showed that one of the largest barriers to gainful employment for people with disabilities is lack of attendant services? Also, think about the emotional and psychological aspects when the one thing attendant services is what maintains your independence and you are told, sorry, wait lists are as long as 1 year. From my perspective, attendants are unsung heroes. They're the ones that are there to assist you with the very most intimate aspects of our lives and leave you feeling with dignity when the service is over. They make a person feel that they're in control of their life by allowing their clients to direct their needs. The independent living philosophy is ingrained in their DNA. Our government understands the importance of attendant services, and the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care, through the local health and integration networks, have made significant investments in 2013, almost $7 million. The Champlain Local Health Integration Network has pledged to eliminate their waitlists entirely, and we hope other LHINs will follow in 2014. 2013 has been a good start, but with approximately 5,000 people waiting for appropriate services in Ontario and growing, more investments need to be made. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. And Nick, on the other flip side to that, can you tell us about your experience with attendant care services, or we call them attendant care because that's the nomenclature in the auto insurance legislation, but can you talk to us a little bit about private sector attendant services?
Sure. Thank you, Jim, and pleasure to be here today. I've been reflecting on how far emergency medicine has evolved over the last few decades, and how emergency room physicians today are able to save lives after the most horrific accidents or illnesses. And in the aftermath of this, conversations like this one are being held about what quality of life follows and the importance of attendant services as part of the quality of life for those who survive, as Peter was mentioning. I think that this topic has not been lost on the government, and there's certainly some support available. As Peter mentioned, specifically through, for example, through CCAC in the community. Trouble with that is it is really, in fact, insufficient. And families are increasingly turning towards private agencies in order to augment and supplement their needs. The trouble with private agencies, despite the fact that they provide good services, that the costs associated are in fact quite high and not sustainable over the long term. So sometimes options do exist. For instance, some may turn to their private insurers, to to the extent that they have had insurance prior to the illness or the injury. Trouble with insurers is that in many instances, if the benefit is available and is covered, its magnitude is insufficient, and there are barriers associated with accessing that benefit. Case in point that I can talk about is Ontario's auto insurance delivered by private insurers. The reason it's an interesting case is because about 65,000 people are involved in motor vehicle crashes and are injured every year and require assistance. So government of, I think about 20 years ago, have had the insight of including attendant services, or as Jim mentioned, they're called attendant care services, in the statutory accident benefit schedule, but successive governments have progressively eroded that benefit and the access to that benefit. So to give you a few examples to that end, the amount, for instance, has been, under your auto insurance, has been, prior to the 2010 government-led reform, was about $72,000, and that was applicable for about 99% of claimants, with the balance of 1% representing the most catastrophically injured, potentially receiving more than that. In the aftermath of the reform, we have seen that those with the most severe injuries, that 1%, continue to be eligible to receive the same amount, but for the remainder 99%, the decrease is quite substantial. For about 20% of them, that benefit has been cut in half, and the remaining close to 80%, the benefit has been completely eliminated because it was considered by the government to not be required for their level of injury. There have been some barriers that have been also put in place at the same time. An example of one that I can tell you about is associated with the fact that in order to receive the benefit, an assessment needs to occur and an insurer needs to approve that assessment, except the approval process, depending on the adjudication, may take anywhere from weeks to months. And of course, we all know that in many instances, excuse me, attendant services are required to address safety concerns. And folks just cannot wait for weeks or months in order to receive those services. Another barrier that has been put in place has to do with folks who live in remote or outlying areas to where professionals need to travel in order to assess the need. That is a problem because the cost of travel sometimes pushes the overall cost of the required assessment over and above a cap that has been imposed in 2010. And as a result, those folks go unassessed and then unattended to. And that is, in my humble opinion, quite discriminatory for those who do not live in urban areas. I've been asked to cut it short. One last point has to do with the fact that even if somebody is assessed for attendant care needs, they still need to satisfy a concept, one of two concepts of incurred expense or economic loss, which are quite unfair, and if somebody asks the question later, I'm happy to expand on it. So you can see that despite the fact that private agencies do exist out there that provide care, you know, they are quite prohibitive in cost over the long run, and insurers are not a very viable option as it stands right now because of lack of funding and barriers in place. Thank you.
Hey, Nick, I didn't want to cut you shorter than I had to, but if we talked about the time required to address the deficiencies in the Ontario auto insurance system, you and I'd probably be here forever, which is too bad. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm the last and least member of the panel, Jim Vigmond, and I'm one of the founding partners of Onley Vigmond, who together with Thompson, Rogers, McLeish, Orlando, as I've said, make up the Personal Injury Alliance, and we are partners in today's program with Spinal Cord Injury Ontario. I've been a lawyer for 30 years practicing in personal injury litigation, and was a director of Spinal Cord Injury Ontario for about 10 years. So the questions now, they have been coming in, and I'm going to try to do them in some type of order. People don't seem to be addressing them to anyone in particular so far. So I'll start with this one. And it's a more basic informational question. What is the difference between attendant care services provided by CCAC and attendant care agencies such as Spinal Cord Injury Ontario or Bellwoods? And Bonnie, I wondered if this is a question you might want to address.
Sure. So I deal with this situation all the time when I'm helping patients plan for discharge when they need attendant care services in the community. Typically, the CCAC, which is the Community Care Access Center, can provide up to 2 hours per day of personal support worker services or attendant care services for an individual, but this consists mainly of bathing, dressing, preparing breakfast, some feeding. It does not include bladder care or bowel care, which is really important. In fact, it's essential to maintaining life. Attendant care services that are provided by the attendant care agencies such as Spinal Cord Injury Ontario, Bellwoods, PACE, there's a number of agencies in the Toronto area and across the province, do provide all of the essential services that an individual with a disability requires. So that involves bowel and bladder care as well as bathing, dressing, etc. Typically, the attendant care outreach agencies provide 3 hours of care a day, and that can be divided into more than one visit, sometimes 2 or 3 visits per day. Sometimes that service is complemented with assistance from the CCAC. But unfortunately, all across the board, there are waiting lists here and there, and there are times when individuals cannot get the care they need in the community, and that's a problem.
Well, and in follow-up to that, does anybody else want to weigh in on that before I move on to the follow-up question?
I'm not sure what the follow-up question is, Jim. I would like to.
Go.
I think, because I work a lot with Bonnie when we're looking at people applying for services in the community, and one of the biggest challenges is if someone has the bowel and bladder needs that Bonnie's addressed, even with 3 hours a day, we often can't meet the needs. If someone needs 4 or 5 intermittent catheterizations in a day, the best case scenario is we could get in there for 3 visits. So what I would like to see is a better coordination of service where if we have the skill set with attendant services to meet that need, then give that allowance for more hours of service versus dividing it between CCAC and the attendant outreach services.
One more. Yes, Anita?
I'll just speak from personal experiences. I think I've been on the system for a long time, so I think it's probably changed. I do have CCA services, but at my time I've been provided with 2 agencies because my care has been divided, so I do get bowel and bladder care through them, through a nursing agency, but then it's split with another agency that provides the PSW care. So, if you talk about the advantages and disadvantages between outreach and CCAC, it's definitely been a big challenge. A lot of the time trying to coordinate between 2 agencies because you need a time-specific appointment in order to get everything to work together in the morning. And I find the other big challenge is, like today is like a perfect example, CCAC usually doesn't start till 8 o'clock in the morning is the earliest time. So whenever, individuals who are looking at employment or things like early conferences, it's very hard to, you have to be able to find alternative means like family members in order to help you get up and ready in the morning. So it definitely makes, when Peter was talking about challenges and, people wanting to live independent lives and be productive members in society, the timings, that are offered through CCAC really makes it difficult to do that and be active participants.
Thanks, Anita. For those of you that don't recognize Anita, she's one of our star performers on our TV commercial from the Personal Injury Alliance. This is a follow-up question from the audience. Why is the wait list so long to receive this service? How can this be improved? My 18-year-old daughter is currently applying for attendant services, but I have heard it may take 3 to 4 years to receive this service. I am very concerned, since this service is critical for my daughter to have the ability to be included in activities during high school, attend post-secondary education, gain future employment, and live independently. Peter, is that something you might want to weigh in on?
Sure. The challenge is funding. There is patchwork funding across the province, and there's limitations at times where one service can support hours with another services. At times, they don't even allow that to happen. It's unfortunate where we end up trying to create all these bandage solutions to try to solve these individual needs at a higher cost and at the same time not appropriate for that individual. I really don't have an answer. I wish funding wasn't the only answer, but in this situation it is.
Is 3 to 4 years a typical wait period in Ontario, Peter?
My projections, I didn't realize were that. From my projections, I heard 1 to 2 years. 3 to 4 is significantly higher than what I've learned.
Okay. Another question from the audience. If the government found the money to eliminate the wait lists, are there sufficient PSWs to do the work?
I'll check in on that one. One of the challenges that we face is recruitment. We often talk working in the community, providing support to people in the community takes a special type of person. They're traveling, for us in the GTA, traveling across the city to meet that need. So I think we've identified certainly some, I don't want to say issues, but where we would like to see enhanced training through the PSW schools for supporting people in the community. And then, as I say, recruitment and retention. I think that the salary or the pay level for people working in the community, at times across the province, there's a disparity between that and working in long-term care facilities.
Maybe further to that, Cheryl, is I'm advised that there is not a provincial norm for the services provided by CCAC, and there is great disparity around the province.
Yeah. I mean, I'm most familiar with Toronto, but there certainly is a difference across the province in what services, attendant services will offer, and the services CCAC offers, but there's also a great disparity in availability of those services when you get into the rural areas.
Here's an interesting question, which is directed to consumers of services. Sorry, I thought someone was asking something. While we all applaud the mandate that the attendant is the, quote, arms and legs, quote, of the consumer, and the consumer should direct their own care, how in the day-to-day reality is the autonomy, self-worth, and value of the attendant also captured? Any consumers?
I think it's a two-way relationship, really, that's being built with the consumer and the service provider. And I think if individuals develop a good rapport, I think autonomy and mutual respect is there.
I agree with Anita. I think it takes a bit of time to develop that relationship, but once that bond is formed, then we both know about boundaries and we know how to respect each other to the maximum level. Thank you.
Can I just say something? I think it's a little bit misleading to just think of attendants as your arms and legs, because attendants really are enablers of a lot of things that people with disabilities do in their lives. And I think as a consumer, I value my attendants very highly, because I do recognize that without them, I couldn't work, and do anything social. So I really do think it's a two-way street.
Thank you. A question from the audience for Barbara Hall. What is the role and perspective of the Human Rights Commission on access and availability of attendant services in Ontario?
The Human Rights Commission views access and wait times to be a major issue. However, we're aware from various attempts over the years of the refusal of courts to treat the wait time issue, and thus the availability, as a form of discrimination that would attract the Human Rights Code and the remedies available in it. The largest single group of complaints within the human rights system, not just in Ontario, but right across the country, flows from people with disabilities seeking the accommodation that codes provide. But the courts have said that wait times flow from decisions of governments to set priorities and determine how much money goes into providing a particular service. And courts won't make those decisions. They say it's up to governments to set their priorities, and unless within a particular allocation of resources they discriminate, then that's not something we're going to interfere with. So if decisions around attendant care, for example, were made on the basis of race, on the basis of sexual orientation, on the basis of age, for example, then that would be considered discriminatory. But if they were made on the basis of the overall pot of money, then the code doesn't apply. And we find that frustrating, as I know do people in many code-protected grounds who end up being faced with big, big wait lists. And that's why we're working with advocacy groups, disability advocacy groups and others to do more public education, to deal with the attitudes that contribute to the setting of priorities, so that with you, we can work to see greater, higher priorities and more funds allocated.
And in follow-up, I think you are perfectly suited to educate us on what the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disability for the Rights of People with Disabilities, what is that convention, and how or can it be used to promote and advocate for attendant care services?
The Lieutenant Governor already referred to the convention, and particularly to Article 19, which speaks to independent living and support. And that section starts out by saying persons with disabilities must be able to live independently. Canada has signed on to this convention, and we're working, the commissions across the country and organizations like the Council for Canadians with Disabilities, DAWN, Community Living, to hold governments to that agreement, to constantly be monitoring what they're doing in order to make that a lived reality. It's great to have those words in the convention, but we can only really celebrate when that becomes a reality for all people who require attendant care in order to live independently. The convention provides for monitoring, independent monitoring of government to show the progress being made there. And to date, the Canadian government has not set up the independent monitoring to see the progress there. The Lieutenant Governor also spoke about the mantra that's a part of the convention, nothing about us without us, and the importance of having people with disabilities be part of that monitoring and reporting. So we're working on pushing the implementation of a monitoring, of a real monitoring provision. At the Ontario Commission, we're also working in areas like assisting people with disabilities to take part in the political process. We know that there are very few people with disabilities who've been elected to governments across the country. And we need people with disabilities to be able to have the political voice, one in voting, but also in being elected to governments, so that the experience of people with disabilities is a part of decision and priority setting, policy setting at all levels of government. So these are things that need to help to happen to expand the priority and the resources available for many things. Today we're talking about attendant care, and certainly there's a lot of things that need to have a higher priority placed on them there.
This is perhaps a good segue to this comment/question. A few years ago, an MPP put forth a request to Parliament to have wait time for attendant care to be viewed the same as wait time for such things as knee and hip replacements. What happened with that, and how did Parliament react to that? Does anybody know the answer to that?
I'm not aware of that specifically, but the headlines in today's newspaper talking about wait times for hip replacement and things like that show that that's not a panacea. I think that governments have put a lot more attention and resources into addressing that, but the need is also expanding in an aging society. So it's a work in progress, and I think it's work that needs to be done on many fronts, and the human rights commissions across the country understand that education, public education, and changing attitudes so that there's an expectation that people with disabilities will be included and have the supports they need to meet that end.
May I just add, there's a curious thing that happens with wait lists for attendant services, and it's kind of like as the waiting time gets shorter, the applications just start flooding in. So we really don't know yet exactly how many additional resources we'll need to eliminate wait lists or wait times, because people are sort of laying back and they can do with family and friend support. So it's kind of a paradox, but right now the head count of wait lists aren't going down, but the wait times are going down with injection of resources.
Well, actually, I can speak to that. I'm perhaps guilty of flooding your wait list, because I heard that direct funding got more funds.
And we love that kind of action.
We'd love that kind of service.
I just wanted to comment that I believe that after rehabilitation for hip and knees, you can access CCAC services for short periods of time after that. So I'll be interested to look that up afterwards, because I believe CCAC can provide that short-term service.
And for those questions which we won't get to, and there are lots of them we won't get to, we will get back to you. For Nick Grivich, according to fiscal policy, Part 1 of the Form 1 indicates the dollars payable per hour is $8.75. The adjusters are asking us to find a PSW who will work for $8.75 per hour. This is non-existent, as the average PSW private rate is $28 per hour, and the minimum wage in Ontario is $10.25 per hour. Even with clients whose needs surpass the maximum $6,000 per month, can you provide us with some insight on how to respond to adjusters when faced with this issue?
I think I'm at a loss, but I can clarify that the Form 1s, for those who perhaps are not aware, is the form or the methodology to calculate the need for attendant care services in the auto insurance system. Every so often, the rates that are used on the Form 1 are changed, but the calculation of the Form 1 is based on the date of loss, on the date of accident. So despite the fact that the current minimum wage is upwards of $10, if the accident occurred some years ago when the Form 1 was at a lower amount, then that Form 1 stands, and it is a real problem. A bigger problem that flows out of it is exactly what was mentioned, is this notion that the rates that are prescribed by the regulation are artificial. And it's impossible to get services even with the latest rates that are prescribed in the regulation. So despite the fact that somebody can be prescribed 24-hour care, the number of hours that the benefit actually buys is significantly less, because the actual rate is, as was mentioned, somewhere between $22 and $27 an hour, depending on the need, whereas the rate prescribed in the regulation, floats between, 10, 11, and for some very small, for a smaller portion, a little bit higher than that. But there is a real discrepancy, and it is very problematic. And unfortunately, family members or friends need to jump in and assist with the care. The problem there becomes that in order to receive any reimbursement, there needs to be an economic loss showed, and that's a very problematic concept, because it goes back to what that person was earning before they started to provide the care. So the easiest way to look at it is, what was the person earning at a job before they started providing care to a loved one? So for those that earn more than the $36,000 that the benefit provides for, they presumably wouldn't leave their work. And for those that earn less or don't earn anything at all, think about a stay-at-home mom who's now providing attending care or attending services to her husband, or think about a student who's providing services for his mom or dad that have been injured. They don't receive anything at all. So the methodology, or the way that the government has put this regulation together, is wrong, because what they're looking at is what is the compensation, or what is the value that the person who's providing the care received, rather than what is the value of the service that they're providing to a loved one. So people who are receiving the care are in a real catch-22, because on the one hand, they can't buy services at market cost because the prescribed rate is so low, and on the other hand, they can't buy them at a discounted rate from a family member because they wouldn't get sufficient reimbursement. So it's a real problem.
In Ontario, until February 1st, in order for, say, a stay-at-home mom to provide attendant care to, let's say, a child, they would not receive any attendant care money, even though the need would be quantified in accordance with Form 1 at $6,000 a month, unless they can establish that they have suffered an economic loss. And if they were a stay-at-home mom, it would be a challenge. And as lawyers, we look for ways to say, well, did they have to spend extra time on driving various places and incurring sort of expenses that add up over time? So far, the court decisions and those at the Financial Services Commission are waffling. They're saying it has to be more than just a minimal amount, but we don't really have any definitive statement. And as of February 1st, the legislation has changed, and the amount of the attendant care is limited to the amount of economic loss you can prove.
It's just to add.
Go ahead.
I mean, you know, the reason that this is a problem, that it's only limited to the economic loss, is because, let's say if I was to provide care for my wife, the economic loss was whatever I am not earning at work now during the 8 hours that I spent at work. What about the rest of the time that I'm providing care for, to my wife? Why is that unaccounted for? It's a very serious problem, and it becomes even more serious the more serious the injury becomes. And for those that are catastrophically injured, they're in a real dilemma.
Can I follow up on the Form 1 question? I think the questioner raised the issue of the Level 1 care being at $11.23 an hour. The Level 2 care, which is basic supervisory care, is compensated at $8.75 an hour under SABS, the Statutory Accident Benefit Schedule, which is less than the minimum wage. Level 3, which is specialized care, is at $17.98, which is still appreciably less than you'd pay for a PSW, as Nick has mentioned. But if we look at the Statutory Accident Benefit Schedule more globally, it provides some limits on the attendant services benefit. That amounts to $6,000 a month for those clients that are designated as catastrophic. And there's a limit of $1 million. So if we do a little bit of math here and take an individual with a high-level tetraplegia who requires 24/7 care, if we use the limit of $6,000 per month stipulated by SABS, then that benefit is used up after 13 years. That means that they may have 50 years that they don't have the proper insured benefit. If we were lucky enough to employ someone at the minimum wage of $10.25 an hour as a live-in, for example, then that total benefit lasts 11 years, the $1 million. If we were to engage a privately contracted PSW at $13 an hour, and maybe possible to do that in a living-in arrangement, then the $1 million is used up in 8 years. And if you use the agency rate, as Nick has mentioned, and I've used a number of $26 an hour, then the $1 million lifetime benefit lasts 4 years. Another way to look at this is that if you take an 18-year-old high-level tetraplegic who requires 24/7 care, and with the life expectancy now increasing with the better care that people provide, that person might well expect to live 50 more years to the age of, say, 68. The $1 million, if you calculate the number of hours that person's going to live, it amounts to $2 an hour provision for attendant care. And what are the consequences of this? Well, the consequences are that obviously the SABS is insufficient the private insurer benefit is insufficient. So then it goes back to the need to depend upon public services or to initiate some tort action and put a personal injury claim through litigation if in fact there's someone at fault and a deep pocket to pay for it. So the minimalistic approach of the SABS benefit simply shifts the burden to the public sector or the tort system.
Right. And so the SABs, as has been referred to, and no-fault benefits are confined only to auto insurance cases. And as Keith said, if there is someone at fault, there is potentially other sources of funding available. And it's not limited to artificially low, unreasonable rates provided in the SABs, but market rates.
Can I just make a comment?
Yes.
So my injury was motor vehicle, and I remember filling out Form 1 17 years ago. And I remember having these discussions with my adjusters and probably my social worker. I don't recall who I filled the form out with. And I'm actually quite disappointed and shocked that we're still having these discussions 17 years later about the faults of Form 1. And why hasn't this issue, I don't know if anyone can answer the question, but why, if we've all recognized that the Form 1 is faulty and it's not basing what reality is, well, why haven't there been changes done for it?
And I can chime in on that, although I'm not a representative of the insurance industry or their biggest fan. They would chime in that that insurance premiums are required to be kept low because of the rate stabilization system we have in Ontario. And the rates can't stay low in light of what they think are large awards in personal injury actions. And they are in a position to influence politicians because it typically becomes one of the biggest issues at election time. And so that near election time, the insurers are clamoring that they can't make any money, they're going to have to exit the system, that there are too many large verdicts out there, and da-da-da-da-da. So the politicians, those that are the ones that are setting the rates, in essence, Anita, in the Form 1s, are now afraid to speak up because they're afraid that if the insurance industry makes good on their threat, it's going to lead to increased insurance premiums, which loses votes. It's as simple as that. So although it's acknowledged by all of us and all of the experts that the forms are inadequate, insufficient, artificially low, they will say that it's better than any other Western civilized country, and we'll just have to deal with it. So I think that's the cynical but unfortunately realistic means by which these rates get set when it's not in anyone's best interest but the insurance industry. Dr. Hayes, what are the most important clinical factors to consider when a life care planner or future care cost expert projects the future needs for attendant care for an individual with a spinal cord injury?
Okay, well, let's start off with the premise that's come down through the Supreme Court for the award of damages for future care costs. And that is that the award should provide for restoration of the lifestyle that the person would have enjoyed had they not been injured, to the extent that money can. And that's a very different test from the test of medical necessity. Oftentimes people will make a case for attendant care services based upon the medical necessity of the service alone. Physicians will often only feel comfortable about speaking to the medical issues, and so the position put forward is we will only support those things that are medically necessary. The Supreme Court has said that's too stringent a test, that there should be a much more generous and liberal interpretation of what is reasonable to restore the person to the quality of life they would have enjoyed had they not been injured. So with that premise, the the typical approach to identification of future care cost needs for attendant services focuses initially on the neurological level of injury. Obviously, individuals with cervical injuries have more needs, are likely to have more needs than people with thoracic or lumbar injuries. And the severity of the injury that occurs, the American Spinal Injuries Association classification, which identifies a person as having motor complete or an incomplete injury in different categories. So the neurological level of injury, the degree of severity of the injury, certainly influences the amount of attendant services that a person will require. But alone, it's not sufficient, because a large part of the attendant services are required from the medical complications that arise after the insult to the nervous system. These medical complications would include things like depression, that would require a lot of attendant services, things like infection, pain, spasticity, autonomic dysreflexia, which can be life-threatening. And so it's very important that when one looks at the attendant services, you don't just look at the neurological level of injury and the degree of completeness, but you look at the whole clinical picture, which includes those medical complications. There are also comorbidities that come up. Many people who have sustained cervical level injuries and tetraplegic will have suffered a brain injury to some degree. 15% of individuals who've got cervical injuries have also sustained brain injury. And yet that is not the primary diagnosis, the cervical injury is. And so you have to look at the comorbidities. And then the next feature, I think, that is important in looking at the clinical aspects of this is projecting the longer-term needs. The needs within the first few years after injury, in the acute stage, are very, very high, then it tapers off a little. But as a person ages with spinal cord injury, they age much faster. It's well documented in the research literature of an accelerated aging effect of spinal cord injury, so that the functional capacity diminishes and reduces much faster than with the normal functional decline of aging. And secondly, there are a large number of medical complications that only come out later in life, whether it's syringomyelia and the syrinx formation that creates further pain, whether it's shoulder discomfort from wheeling and overusing the shoulders, whether it's some of the diabetes and cardiovascular effects that are a known consequence of the more sedentary lifestyle. These are late emerging consequences that have to be recognized when doing a life plan, a life care plan for somebody with a spinal cord injury. You can't just base it on the current status at the time of the evaluation.
Thanks. So just as a comment to follow up to that, I once retained an expert from a leading spinal cord hospital, and they were so used to working with the publicly funded programs, which, as we know, are so limited to 3 to 4 hours a day, that's all that he would support. Do you find that you encounter these kinds of problems with those that, even though they work in the system, they've got blinders on because of their focus on dealing with the publicly funded programs?
Oh, absolutely. And that's one of the problems in looking at life care planning reports or future care cost reports. Oftentimes, the individual will identify the SABS rate as if that's going to be available after settlement, when in fact after settlement or after an award for damages, one has to pay pretty much market rates, which are 2 to 3 times the rates that are covered in SABS. So that's a problem. Many physicians and many clinicians in general are reluctant to project into the future too much because it goes beyond their expertise. Their expertise is what surgery they've done, what are the immediate complications that arise from that surgery, or in the rehabilitation care that's been provided. And it's only now that there's sufficient research evidence accumulating that speaks to the longer-term needs of an individual with spinal cord injury. So really we need to have a better evidence-informed projection of future needs rather than having people being defensive about not wanting to go outside of their sphere of excellence in the clinical management.
Thank you. This question's for Sandra. My family member has funding through CILT, which is absolutely a positive program. He is very fortunate to have this program. Does the attendant care need to be hired from the public sector, or can they come from an agency? The reason for the question is because every time the attendant leaves, the new attendant must be trained, and if the attendant comes from an agency, the training would not need to be so intense.
I think that might be a sort of a matter of perspective, because sometimes it depends on your setting. Like if the agency sends you a different person every day, you're training a different person every day. So I kind of don't quite understand the question. The way the program is constructed, though, it's constructed in a way that puts program participants as the employer of record. So it's very difficult to resolve that with using the resources to hire your personnel through an agency. I'm really not sure if I answered that properly.
Anybody else? Okay. Speaking of insurance, I'm retired, so no longer have accident insurance from my company. I had an accident in my home resulting in my becoming an incomplete quadriplegic. I learned that my home insurance did not cover the homeowner or spouse. My liability coverage would cover anyone else injuring themselves in my home. Why not the homeowner? The answer is that a homeowner's policy covers you for accidents that others have or at your home, as long as they're not members residing in the same household. Homeowners insurance also covers you against liability that you incur by reason of your actions anywhere in the world. If you yelled on the top of your rooftop some defamatory comment in Australia, your homeowner's policy would probably respond to that unless it was considered an intentional act. So you don't have coverage for accidents that occur to the homeowner in their own home. Okay, this one is for Cheryl. In attendant outreach services, the maximum allowable hours is 90 hours per month. Apparently that's, though I don't know that. Maybe you can comment on that. These are not enough to meet the needs of many consumers, particularly where there are more complex needs. What mechanism is there for obtaining approval for providing increased hours of support to meet these needs through outreach attendant services?
I think there's two components to that. So when we talk about the guidelines that were put out in 1996, I think it was, talk about, we referenced earlier 3 hours a day, but it actually says 90 hours a month. So that can have different compositions of hours. But we mentioned earlier, if someone has a high-level spinal cord injury, requires assistance with bathing, dressing, showering, bowel and bladder, potentially eating, meal preparation, 3 hours a day doesn't even come close to meeting the needs. And I want to bring up another scenario with that as well. But on that note, there used to be a mechanism where we could contact the Ministry of Health to get an extension on hours or get an exception for hours. And with the change to the LHIN, that's become a grayer area. And I know from an agency perspective, it seems to be more restricted to get that exception. The other area of concern with that 90-hour maximum is that if someone requires assistance at home and at work or school, it's the 90 hours maximum. So again, it falls far short of meeting that need, and it makes it very difficult for that inclusion of people in the workforce or school, and we're seeing that more and more often. So right now, we're actually drafting something to try and present to get that, a distinction between that they can have the 90 hours of support at home as well as, or be considered completely separately as 90 hours for support at work and or school.
Thank you.
I just wanted to comment a little bit about the job accommodation and attendant services. You know, we work with some clients where they are employed and they can't, they're not getting the hours of service for job accommodation. And we have one particular client who we've managed to get the service for at least 1 year, and the next year the person will lose their job because we can't accommodate the service. So I think within the 90 max, we often see the personal care component addressed, but we rarely see the job accommodation component.
So when you say after a year you're going to lose the accommodation, you mean you're going to lose funding for the attendant while at work?
Yeah.
And then the employer is not able to employ the person under those circumstances?
Correct.
One of the other challenges I wanted to add that Peter made me think of is if finding a job is a challenge in and of itself in the marketplace. I loved what David Onley said, is when you add the disability into that equation, it's tougher to get a job. What makes it even tougher is coordinating the need for attendance services support at work in a timely fashion for getting that job. And with the waitlist situation right now, it's daunting. How do you do that?
This is a question of process. Maybe Peter's best equipped to deal with it. Will participants receive a transcript of this webinar, and will this be posted somewhere?
Absolutely. This will be posted in the next couple of weeks on SEI Ontario's website as well as the Personal Injury Alliance website.
Sorry, what was this last one?
It will be, the webinar is being recorded and will be posted in the next couple of weeks.
No, I didn't catch the name of the second website.
Personal Injury Alliance website.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Question from the audience. What are the options for attendance services for a person who is ventilator dependent? How do we get more individuals out of institutions and into the community? Are there ventilator-specific programs across the province?
I can address that part. I know that we have some providers in Toronto that do specialize in having attendants that can provide that vent support. And the other option for those people who can't actually manage their own funds and direct their own care is the direct funding program. We have a sizable number of, I hate that term, but ventilator dependent or ventilator users on our program, because the program itself is very flexible, and we work within an envelope of 7 hours a day, but we have the capacity to go beyond that for certain situations like ventilator users or other communication type non-speaking type people. So it is an option to look into direct funding, but you'd have to see if you can manage all the employer sides of it. Because you're on direct funding, you're the employer of record.
Is there anybody else? Okay.
Just to comment on what Sandra said, I would like to say that if I'm living in the home and not in the long-term care, I really need a 24-hour attendant care, which is hour to hour, because your family is still filling in the gaps of care because you cannot be left alone because of safety reasons. So you need really a 24-hour care, and it would be cheaper for me to live at home and enjoy a better quality of life rather than go back to the long-term care and cost the government more money. Thank you.
Well said. Here's one, I'll throw it out to you, Nick, just so you can start to sweat. As a rehabilitation professional who conducts these attendant care assessments to assess the need for funding under MVA insurance, that's motor vehicle accident insurance, is there a way to best serve these clients to meet their needs, or is it inevitably restricted by the funder?
It really is restricted by the auto insurance funder, but there are creative ways, because of this discrepancy between the hourly prescribed rate versus market. We're always in a position where we need to be creative and we need to find how to bridge that period of time. So what we do is we always, first of all, rely on what's publicly available. Then layer on top of that what is available through the auto insurer, and then supplement the rest through friends and family. And sometimes it's possible, and sometimes it's not possible. But we really try to make the best of it, and it's a challenge that we face regretfully every day.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Nick. If you have a special expert law firm, and if you've got people that to deal with spinal cord injured patients like Nick's company does, there are ways to work creatively and to try to get funding publicly, privately, family, friends, get some advances from the insurance company potentially. There are certainly restrictions that we can't avoid, but in the long term, but in the short term, we can try to creatively work around it.
But interestingly enough, if I can just add, even if we have friends and family who are providing care, the burnout of caregivers, and I think it's a topic that we haven't discussed, is so prevalent, which is another reason why attendant services are required, because as much as friends and family can provide for care, there are physical limitations. And in preparation for this, I was looking at some CIHI information, and what they were stating is that nearly 17% of informal caregivers, which is friends and family, do experience burnout, and that is a very significant number. And as much as 32% of those that are providing over 20 hours a week of attendant services. So that's 1 in 3, which is a very high number.
Thanks, Nick.
Jim, can I add something to that I see with applicants a lot?
Sure.
In order to maintain a relationship with a spouse, or even an intimate or a caring relationship, is very challenging when you're now put in the role of caregiver. So that's a factor that I take into consideration a lot when looking at that need for service, is the quality of the relationships and the life that they have. Knowing full well, someone said it, the caregivers fill in the gaps.
Can I just add to that as well? Because Nick touched in when you talked about burden of care of family members. And, we've been talking a lot about employment and getting people back to work and being productive members of society, but we've also often overlook the role that individuals play within their own family. And it's come up a lot, even just with some of the research that I've done. Individuals, if you're a parent, if you have a child, even if it's just a spouse or a partner, there's always a division of labor within the household. And oftentimes, these sorts of tasks are overlooked, where an individual may divide up tasks based on their own abilities, but may still find it challenging, say with household chores or cooking, if that's what their role within the family is. And that type of assistance should be provided to them to assist them with that role. Otherwise, all the burden of care within the family household ends up leaning on one individual and leading to burnout, and also leading to stress and issues within the relationship itself.
But unfortunately, the public services don't provide help with homemaking, cleaning, shopping. I just went through this with a patient that I was involved in planning discharge with, and I posed the question to numerous agencies, including Ontario Disability Support Program, funded by the Ministry of Health, which used to provide homemaking services and does no longer do that. So I think the public system isn't supporting this need.
I would like to comment on this. Speaking in my case, my family has had to fill in the gaps in care all the time. What happens to those loved ones who get burnt out, as we said, looking after a loved one for an indefinite chronic illness, which is, prolonged for many years, and they don't know of the future of that illness, and it's progressing every year. There is no human rights issue in this.
Any comment on the human rights aspect of that?
Yeah, I think sadly the code is not of a lot of assistance in terms of dealing with that. I think it probably would be described as a human rights issue for most of us. It's certainly a human issue, quality of life issue, but it doesn't fit into the way that the code describes accommodation or discrimination. So it leaves us with having to do our work in changing attitudes, in helping create political will to get it addressed elsewhere. But from a human perspective, it's an enormous issue, and certainly leaves us at the Commission feeling that we need some better vehicles to address it.
I'm advised, somewhat ironically perhaps, that the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care officially announced the expansion funding for direct funding today. And you can go on the ontario.ca MOHTLC and you'll find the announcement there, which brings me to a question, and I'll direct it to you, Peter. What are some core differences between personal support worker services offered by many CCACs and those offered by community outreach services and those supporting by self-administered direct funding?
Okay, so in terms of direct funding, and Sandra, you can help me with this, it's a more flexible service. You hire and train your own attendants, and you have the ability to hire and fire your own attendants as well. So you're in complete control of the service being administered to you. In terms of outreach attendant services, someone comes to your home from an agency and is able to provide the service that you require. And in terms of, and if you, let's say, need an attendant, the agency handles the finding the attendants for you. You don't have to seek the attendants like you do in the self-administered direct funding program. And in terms of CCAC, I find the CCAC more of a medical model in comparison to the other two services. Often, from my experience, when you have somebody coming in from CCAC, they have a pre-prescripted task list of what they're going to provide for you that day. Whereas with the other services that I shared, you are in control. You may have something that you want assistance with on one day, and you can utilize your attendant to do something different on the next day. So it's a much more flexible service.
Yeah, I think that's the key. Difference between direct funding and most of the other stuff is the flexibility that you have. Like with most of the programs, so we haven't talked about supportive housing so much, but that's where the actual attendant provides you with services in your home, but your home is in the building and it only provides services to the people in the building. But with direct funding, for example, the attendant can go wherever you are as long as the attendant can get to that place. Like, for example, instead of, I don't know, having the attendant meet me at work, maybe they meet me at a shopping center or, stuff like that. So you're still within the same envelope, but, you have more flexibility about where the service is provided to you. And I don't think the other programs have the flexibility that that model would have.
I would like to comment on that. With outreach, there is one limitation which stood out in my case is the nighttime assistance. Being ventilated, I cannot be left alone in bed in the nights, and I need suctioning, and I have various needs with ventilator, and the outreach services would not accommodate that. And with direct funding, I have nighttime assistance, which is wonderful.
Back to wait times. In our area, and I don't know where that is, I have been told that the problem rests with the processing delays within CCAC. CCAC is to determine the needs and then to refer consumer to an agency such as Independent Living Services. Independent Living Services says that they are prepared to provide the needed service. Could this be a valid statement? So who's got experience with CCAC and ILS?
I can speak a little bit to it. I know in some of the areas of the province, and I don't know a lot, that the CCAC is the gatekeeper or the access point for the independent living services as well. And that's a fairly new initiative, I believe. I'm looking, I know there's someone in the audience that could answer this one
It's not consistent
better.
across all the LHINs either. Like different LHINs do different access models.
Yeah.
I just think it's important to also comment that CCACs are not providing direct service. They're a brokerage to other services that are providing the service as well. So at times, you don't get the same training, you don't get the same service because they're using multiple providers to accommodate one person's need.
I want to add to that I think one of the real challenges with that model of service is the difference between philosophy or approach. CCAC comes from a medical model. The attendant outreach services is very much focused on the independent living philosophy. And there's a different application or consideration for hours of service within those two different models. So I think philosophically there can be challenges. There can be conflicts.
On the good news front, and this is further to what I had said earlier about the government announcement, is that the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care announced an additional $5 million to expand the direct funding program to extend support to reach a goal of serving 1,000 Ontarians. Currently, 750 Ontarians are being served. Everybody's got to think that that's just a terrific intervention from the government, and we applaud them for that. I mean, to go from 750 to 1,000 has got to be a substantial increase. We're getting near the end, a couple more, and I won't get to them all, I can assure you. Why do many consumers who use publicly funded attendant services have to use multiple service providers to get the support they need? What are some possible solutions? Peter?
Touched on that. It was something I addressed earlier. Even if we look at someone with high level of needs, so they could have outreach attendance services as one provider, so for up to 21 hours a week, and then through CCAC may get 14 hours a week, and through CCAC have a different agency or maybe 2 or 3 agencies. And again, I think it's looking at the bigger picture of how can we maximize the efficiency of those services rather than there being that distinction of we have a maximum, CCAC has a maximum. Look at the individual's needs and who best meets those needs. And we could minimize then the number of service providers involved.
Yeah, absolutely, and I agree with that as well. So I think Cheryl mentioned this earlier. Well, rather than using multiple providers per se, like having CCAC, also support an independent living service provider, why doesn't CCAC provide the funding to the independent living service provider, which in turn they could provide attendants for that support rather than nursing? It'd be a more efficient way of doing that if they could share hours or resources to accommodate a person to make it more person-centered.
And as a final follow-up to this, are there resources available to help a potential user navigate the system safely and confidently? And speaking from an outsider, and to have this wealth of experience and expertise that is on this panel, not having had that expertise, it seems to me like it's just a minefield out there, a maze. What resources does a person have in order to determine where they fit in the system and how they can get the maximum amount of attendant care, attendant service?
Can I speak to that first from the point of view of the hospital? So in the hospitals, there are social workers that are have quite a bit of expertise and knowledge in terms of helping the patient enter into the system. And we help patients identify their needs along with the interdisciplinary team. And then we help the patient do applications to usually Centre for Independent Living if someone's living in Toronto, and other agencies if they're living outside of Toronto. And then we depend on the agency that is going to meet with the client and do the assessment, such as Spinal Cord Injury Ontario, who has a different level of expertise, much more specific to the service that they offer, and can be extremely helpful. Perhaps others would like to comment.
Yeah, I'm not biased whatsoever, but I happen to know this wonderful organization called Spinal Cord Injury Ontario that provides services from the point of injury all the way through to community living. So what's unique about SCI Ontario is that they're one organization that actually provides service from beginning to end, not in one point of the continuum of care. So we hope that people can utilize the support of our regional services coordination.
And if I may make a comment, that there are some models of care that have specifically identified a navigator as an individual to help negotiate all the different services and systems. And those pilot studies, particularly in the Hamilton area, have proved to be very cost effective.
Well, thanks very much, everyone. Unfortunately, it's my role to wrap this up. It's been a most informative, enlightening, and engaging dialogue with all of you out there. There are as many questions that were asked that I didn't get to as that I asked. I do assure you that somebody will respond to each of the questions. Judging by the success of this inaugural event, it will now become an annual summit on attendant services, and most likely will expand from there. Thank you to Bill Adair for sharing his vision, and thank you to Peter Athanasopoulos as well, in particular, for sharing in it. Thank you to the attendant providers that are here today, and to all of you who have attended both electronically and here personally. Thank you to the partners, the law firms of the Personal Injury Alliance, Thompson Rogers, McLeish, Orlando, and Onley Vigmond. Thank you for your participation. We hope we've educated you, and we hope that we have advanced the interests of people in need of attendant services and the mobility impaired. It has been a real honor and a great privilege to have been your chair. Until next time, thank you.